Hello, London. We are ready for your vote.
Hello, I'm Stephen Perkins, and this is Douze. Right now, it is Sunday, the 18th of May. It is 10:45 in the morning, and the Eurovision Song Contest is over for another year. So I am here to analyse, to quote a certain country pop trio, what the hell just happened. Joining me once again, we have AJ Clay, who has valiantly been with us all week. Hi, AJ.
Hello.
And also, a very special guest live from Basel. We are delighted to welcome back Eurovision broadcaster Adrian Bradley. Adrian, welcome.
Good morning. I think it's morning. I have no idea what time it is.
Yeah, I think I think I can safely tell everyone that we're all operating here on very little sleep. So apologies in advance for if the podcast is perhaps not as sharp as it might be at other times. But we're going to persevere and share our thoughts on last night's grand final. So let's start with perhaps a little wrap up of how everyone's sort of feeling in the wake of the grand final. Because I think for me, I'm quite used to kind of after the final finishes, I'm usually up for about 2 hours because I'm still sort of so hyper and full of adrenaline. And last night I felt very flat after it finished.
Yeah, I was exhausted. I think it was more kind of the adrenaline just kind of leaving my body and just feeling like, oh, more of a sort of relief than anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me it was a lot of adrenaline as usual when you're in the press center, and just because we've been saying all week what an unpredictable contest we think it really is compared to what the bookmakers are saying, and seeing that then play out was fascinating. It was possibly one of the most, as a journalist, one of the most interesting voting sequences I can remember in a very long time.
Yeah, I think that was really interesting. As the jury votes were playing out, and we were seeing there wasn't really a consensus, which we've been kind of used to happening in the last couple of years, where there's kind of one country that's emerging as a very obvious front runner, and it wasn't. Yeah, there was a lot of support behind Austria and a fair bit behind France, but there was also a lot of votes going in other directions, which we weren't kind of anticipating.
Yeah, I don't think our living room called any of the jury correctly. Like we were going, oh, I bet they're going to vote for, oh, Latvia. Oh, okay. It was very, very random.
It was very similar for us. So we were in a group sitting around in a press center. We'd found like some sofa and bean bags and some snacks that had made a kind of makeshift living room. And it was the same with everyone that's going to be 12 points. We looked at each other and went, oh, well, this will be 12 points for. And then, like you say, we look at each other and go, Latvia, Italy. And it's just like, okay.
And we did end up with Austria as the winner, which I think wasn't necessarily the front runner, but I think was perhaps the one that a lot of people had kind of maybe as their second or third prediction. Um, it was an interesting result because of the way it played out. It felt like people were less excited about Austria winning than the fact that it wasn't the alternative. And we have, I believe, if I've been doing my maths correctly, on a very sleep deprived Sunday morning, that we had the lowest total points for a winner under the current scoring system at 436, because the lowest before was Duncan Lawrence, who got 498. So I think that kind of reflects what kind of an unpredictable and kind of spread out voting sequence we had this year.
Absolutely. And like the few things kind of stood out for me. Firstly, there was something like, I think, about 10 countries that got above 200 points, which kind of shows a lot of kind of the spreading around. No country got more than 200 points in both the jury and the phone vote, like a 200 point score from both sides of the voting, which is also very, very rare. Like we say, we've had situations where like Carrier could get 500 odd points and lose. And tonight that would have been an incredibly dramatic win. And actually, I think that also reflects, and we're going to talk more, I know, about the UK, but that reflects in the UK, we got many more points than we've got in a good couple of years. 88 points is a great score, much better than last year. But actually, our technical position on the board was a place lower, literally by a case of 2 or 3 points. But yeah,
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. One thing I kind of noticed was that for all of the talk about Israel dominating the televote, they actually got a lower score in the televote this year than they did last year. But because there
Hmm.
wasn't the same kind of consolidation around 2 or 3 songs that everyone was voting for, either in the jury or the televote, it did mean that their overall performance was stronger because the competition around them was weaker. So that was really interesting to watch play out.
I just thought it
And I
was really
think
interesting that we didn't quite get as many votes for, like I say, the sort of favourites like Sweden and maybe Finland and stuff like that. They didn't sponge up the votes in the way that I expected at all.
I don't know if we're going to talk, if we want to talk a bit more detail about that, because I think it's a really interesting discussion about the difference between what maybe is a bubble thing and what
Mm.
really is happening at home. And I think I and Sweden were a brilliant example of that, because the odd Sweden were favourite when everybody expected Mums to be the act. But at the time, obviously a lot has happened since then, but at the time I think that seemed reasonable, and based on the other acts that we had known so far, that seemed reasonable. But what happened is immediately after Melfest, when Mons didn't win, the odds did not change at all. I expected the odds to fall away on Sweden for a bit and then maybe come back, and they didn't. And then I think what we got was just an echo chamber of, oh, Sweden are the favourites. Oh, Kai surprisingly won Melfest. That will happen again. And just kind of got into a bubble of that. And every time I saw it throughout the week in Basel, I looked at it on the stage against the others and just went, this doesn't feel like a winner to me. Like, it's good and it's slick, and yeah, it came top 5, but it didn't scream to me like a winner in the way that Loreen did, or the way that Nemo did. And so yeah, I think that we do need to, as Eurovision fans that pay more attention to the cycle, and especially the pre-season, we've got to be aware of our biases, I think, in that when it comes to talking about who the front runners and favourites are.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is perhaps a tendency to default to Sweden when we're not sure what's going to happen, and I think as well, I agree with you that Sweden didn't feel like a winner when I saw it, and I think that's to me because I didn't see it getting the same kind of televote sweep because it didn't have that kind of intensity that I think a televote winner normally gets. If you look at the sort of previous televote winners in the last few years, they're either kind of very passionate and earnest, or they're incredibly frenetic tempo-wise. And Sweden was quite chill, which I think maybe wasn't quite the same kind of incentive to vote for it that perhaps could have been.
I completely agree. And then to go on to point on Finland, I think Finland is a perfect example of a bubble song, because what I think happened with Finland is it was huge in the press center, it was huge in the arena, but is that something that necessarily is going to reflect back at home? I'm not entirely sure, and it didn't in the end. I mean, it did better than I expected in the juries, and then worse than I expected in the phone vote, which was very interesting for it. But all of the stories that I had told myself about what was going to happen in the voting, very few of them actually played out. What's most interesting about Austria as a winner is quite early on I put a bet on Austria, not early enough to have got very good odds, but like certainly before I got to Basel, and so that came through. But throughout the whole of the last 2 weeks, I just completely lost faith in it. I didn't think it worked, and I actually think I underestimated Austria, because I watched it again this morning on YouTube, and just to re-see it again, and you realize quite how slick it really is. But it's slick, but also has that energy, has that kind of fun moment. Comparing it to Switzerland, which I'm sure we'll talk about with the Nil Pois,
Mm.
it connected with you as an audience much more than I thought it would in black and white. And I think the real hero of the moment is Sergio Jean, who is 23 years old, and just seems to have the Midas touch with staging right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting that I think we discussed when it qualified in the semis that it was very designed for TV. It kind of felt like you weren't in the arena when Austria was on, but I can kind of see why that would work with like people at home just kind of going that wow, this is incredible, it's so dramatic, and like you say, we're in our bubble and kind of all bara bass doing, and maybe
It's
we just
yeah.
didn't see the epicness sneak up on us.
And it's true what you say about it not quite having that, being very TV focused and not quite having the same focus in the arena. But having been in the arena, it did, you can see everything that's going on. You watch the whole performance. It's not kind of hidden away and in front of you. Now I compare that to Switzerland in the arena. Switzerland was an awful experience in the arena. She was
Oh no.
completely hidden away because of how they had done this kind of lighting and camera effect. You could barely see anything, and it was quite boring as an audience member in the arena. Now we kept on being told that, like, oh, it looks absolutely brilliant on camera, and it did look brilliant on camera, but it looked like a video. It didn't look like a performance, and that's where I think it kind of lost the connection. So I think they were smart. They were smart, and maybe smarter than we had accounted for with Austria in doing enough, and that braked color at the end to thank the arena and the audience, just to remind the audience where they are. I think where this is being filmed, I thought was smartly done, and same running order spot as Loreen, so there's nothing wrong with being in ninth place.
Yeah, it's a very good point.
Well,
Yeah, I think we can talk about Switzerland briefly while we're here, because that was we were wondering how things were going to go with the big banners with France and Switzerland. Both kind of underperformed in the televote. I was thinking possibly France would kind of draw in the mum vote, that there'd be loads of mums watching who'd be like, oh my god, I relate to this so much, I'm vote, 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 vote. And that didn't happen at all. So, well, not enough to make any difference. So that was slightly surprising to me. But then Switzerland getting 0 points was the genuine kind of sit up and take notice moment, because that I thought would connect people just from being a very beautiful vocal, but clearly not.
yeah, there were some absolutely shockers of 0 points. And I think that was definitely one of them, because I really did feel for Zoe. And I felt for the hosts as well, because we kind of noted that, they could cut back to them. They looked so distraught. It was just, I really felt for them.
I know we might get onto it later though, but what I will say at that moment is, before Switzerland's votes was the point that I was most anxious about the result, because we'd worked out there were 178 points left, and I think Austria needed 100, around about 100, and Switzerland needed around about 144. And you could absolutely have imagined a situation where both had got about 90.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting seeing that come in. So for some people that wanted or didn't want a particular result, that Switzerland result was an incredibly mixed emotional moment, because on the one hand it was, there is a zero, but then on the other hand it's kind of like, okay, I was worried. If you were worried about it, you can breathe again, and you know exactly what the result is going to be. There is no tension. It's a flaw in that voting announcement system. Actually, is that all you need is a calculator, and you can follow along, and then that final split screen is never a suspense.
Yeah.
But which normally I try and avoid doing, because I like suspense. But sometimes it's helpful to know the numbers.
Yeah. Let's move on and just talk about the overall hosting of this year from Switzerland, because I think actually they did a very good job. I think the presentation was very slick. I think there was a lot in there for the fans to really appreciate without kind of alienating the casual viewer. I would say, the hosting team I really enjoyed. I thought Hazel and Sandra were great. I don't know if it was the best idea to save Michelle for the final, because I felt by the time she arrived, the chemistry between Sandra and Hazel was so good that Michelle felt slightly surplus to requirements.
I agree with that. For me, I think Michelle is a very big star in Switzerland, and it's quite possible that was very much a nod for the Swiss audience and the Swiss viewers watching. In the same way that in the UK we got Graham Norton on the Saturday night. You could argue that he didn't need to be there. I think what Graham perhaps added was that ability during the votes coming in to add a bit of the level of kind of just dealing with mishaps and things happening. But given that Michelle didn't actually do the voting sequence last night, you do sit there and think, well, she wasn't really needed. And Hazel had become such a star throughout the week. I think for people watching at home, saw her on Tuesday night and were a bit like, oh, is she a bit awkward? What's going on? But I think they warmed to her incredibly quickly. And by that point, we in Basel were already deeply, deeply in love with her. I think she's an absolute star. So funny, so quick. She came out and did a warm up with the crowd 15 minutes before the show, each show.
Oh,
where there
Oh
was an
wow.
wow.
audience, which the hosts normally don't do. The hosts normally come on for a few minutes just before, but they're not going to do that big warm up. She clearly wanted to and came and did, quite a funny comedy set for about 10 minutes, just bantering with the audience and bantering with Henke, the floor manager for Eurovision, who's been there for years and years and years. And it was lovely, but that showed how much she loved being with the crowd, how much she loved performing. She is a comedian. That is her absolute forte. And some of the crazy stunts that she did all week, the crowd
The
surfing
crowd surfing was
interviews
The
amazing.
crowd
was
surfing was
so brave,
terrifying.
so terrifying,
Yes.
so utterly stupid, and yet wonderful and just completely everything about her character. And I loved it.
Yeah.
I think our conclusion was that there really was very kind of like one is a clown and one is kind of the deadpan one, and it just we sort of gradually warmed to them because we weren't very sure on Tuesday. We were just kind
Yeah.
of thinking, don't know, but
When you
yeah,
realise it
yeah,
was kind
definitely
of
came around.
that was a deliberate thing that they were doing. And also, I'm just going to say, in terms of Sandra, I don't know if anyone else noticed this. Sandra got more and more Rebecca Front as the week went on, and reached peak Rebecca
Did
Front on Saturday.
she absolutely did? That's well spotted.
And also, I just want to say, in terms of Hazel, but the moment where I think she represented the audience more than anything else was after the Baby Lasagna Karia face off, where she basically got in and tried to make them kiss.
Yes,
Yes.
it was very. Oh, we're listening to the AO3 fanfic this year. Okay, I see what you're doing.
And that was,
She and of course with Erica Vickman in the green room
oh yes, the
uh,
fondue.
on
Yes.
Thursday night in the fondue. That was quite something, and I love how much Erica played into that as well. It was a wonderful moment. But yeah, I think overall, I've got to take my hats off to the Swiss. I think they did a very good job,
Yeah,
especially when you've got to follow a Swedish Eurovision that, and Edward Afton in the script, he knows what he's doing and all of that. It's difficult to follow. And of course, it wasn't at that sort of standard and level, but they did do a good job and they kept things moving along. They kept the tone about right all of the time. And I, yeah, I think the Swiss will come away from this and we should be very proud of what they've done.
yeah, and I think having that Baby Lasagna Karia kind of reunion face-off thing in the final worked so well. I think that really
Wonderful.
just
I
came
adored
alive,
that.
and they were having so much fun, and you could just feel the energy coming off it at a point where the show sometimes is flagging a bit by then because everyone watching is quite tired and it's been going on for ages, and it just felt like the whole thing just erupted in this burst of colour and energy, and it was so good.
Yeah, and we needed it right there as well. So
Yeah, and the two songs just mashed together so well, and I think that was probably my highlight of all the kind of like interact entertainments. I think between that and Nemo's song as well, I think that was really really good. I do think though that they were kind of showing the previous skits that they'd done on the semis, and the only thing that never sat well with me was the sort of comedy song about Swiss things, which I was really, really on the edge of my seat going, they're not going to do that line again, are
Oh
they?
God, yeah.
About being neutral. No, okay, they didn't. Um, but yeah, didn't like that one.
No. And let's move on and talk about the United Kingdom. Obviously, good result for them with the juries. I think possibly better with the juries than some of us were even anticipating. Even though we were thinking it would be a good jury for them. Obviously, then zero in the televote for the second year in a row. Is this a sign that perhaps something needs to change in our approach? Part of me was thinking, do we need to go back to a national final so that we can find an act that's going to, people are going to vote for with their phones? But then, is our experience of national finals been leading us in the wrong direction for so long that would make things worse? I don't know. I don't know what the solution is here.
I really do think that they captured, the kind of lightning in a bottle with Sam Ryder. And I do think that maybe the BBC need to cast their net further afield because they've kind of gone for, Remember Monday are really good, but they were very sort of West End musical coded. The staging didn't really work for me. But maybe if they just looked at more like BBC introducing or, just more taking a chance on acts that might be a bit different, genre wise, even.
so I'll maybe come at this from a slightly different angle, actually, because I think before the votes came in, I probably would have been much more negative about the BBC than I actually am now. Than once I saw the jury scores. So, and the BBC strategy, and I think they were incredibly upfront about that. We've interviewed Andrew Cartmel as the head of delegation on other opportunities, and they were very clear that what they wanted a jury strategy, that they were putting forward an act that would impress juries. And I think they'll come away with 10th place in the jury vote as that was a success and job done.
Yeah,
Now
yeah.
that is step one.
Yeah.
Now that, and I think that, but I do think that's a step in the right direction. But they're not right. They've understood those elements of it and how to get the jury. And I think, for too long, I would say, and if we ignore Sam, for too long, we've not managed to get either. I think Lucy was the last one to get any kind of noticeable jury vote and noticeable vote. So actually doing something and focusing on like, right, they need to sing, they need to perform, they need to have that kind of energy. That's great. Where we fell down and a few kind of music journalists were kind of talking to me about the song is kind of like the song works, but not necessarily on first listen. But there are clever things in how it is written that actually does appeal to a jury. But unfortunately, absolutely doesn't appeal to somebody just listening to it in 3 minutes, going, "What's going on? Why is that tempo changed? What's happened? Why are we suddenly slowing down again in the chorus?" All of those bits that kind of throw you out of the song. And I do also agree, unfortunately, with the staging, it didn't do enough. It didn't work. And the example for me is Luxembourg. Venue show, you can do clever theatrical staging, and if you've got three artists like Rebecca Monday that can do it, I think you either lean into it or you ignore it. But what we ended up was it's a bit of a halfway house. And Ace is a great creative director, but is used to doing either tours or more often kind of big kind of the Brits, the MTV Awards, those sorts of music shows. And I think their lack of Eurovision experience perhaps slightly showed when you compare it to what Sergio did and gets straight away on his debut and comes back and kind of understands what his job is for that 3 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's a really really good point actually, and also I think what we've kind of seen a few times in recent years is that you can have a good year like the UK and Spain did in 2022, but you still need that kind of infrastructure behind you that can make that happen repeatedly, as we've kind of seen this year with Croatia and Ireland, who both had great years last year and then couldn't repeat it this year because they just didn't have the network, the funneling through of these this pipeline of artists and songs that they couldn't it showed that kind of what happened last year was essentially a fluke, and you need a system like Finland has, like Sweden has, where you've got a constant supply of high quality artists and songs coming through which you can draw from, and you might not have a great result every year, but you've got a decent chance most years.
And that comes from having buy-in from the record
Yeah.
labels, which just we still
Yeah.
do not have in the UK. Like Remember Monday didn't have a record label at the point that the BBC chose them, and they do now, but it's not a big record label. Now Sam Ryder, actually, Sam Ryder and both Ollie and May were a bit different in that they did, and it's possible that the experiences with Ollie and May maybe is what made the record labels a bit more nervous this year in getting involved. That plays into why we're absolutely not in a position to have a national final yet, because the record labels just that they might not get we might be able to convince them to get behind a Eurovision act, but to get them to get behind a national final for if we're lucky 2 or 3 weeks on Saturday night on BBC, but maybe just one night, and then hear nothing from their artists again, they're not going to do that. So unless we have a national final where there's 2 or 3 songs from it that you would like to win, there's no point in having one, and we're not ready to do that.
Yeah.
Now the model that we could look at, however, is Germany. And Germany, I think, put in a great song that was very current, that had a very credible result from both the juries and the phone vote. And they got effectively the German Simon Cowell and gave it his job to pick a German Eurovision winner, but as a TV show, and make it a whole thing, use his ego, make it about him. And we kind of did that with Andrew Lloyd Webber, if you remember, a few years ago.
We did.
Yeah.
And we came fifth, I think, that year.
But then we also
that
did
was
it.
a really good
But then we did it the year
Yeah.
after with Pete Waterman, and look what happened.
Yes, exactly. And so it's quite telling that you've got to pick the right person to do that.
Yeah,
Ironically, and as much whether, I know very divisive and all sorts of reasons not to or whatever, but Simon Cowell is not, pull him up on his ego and say, right, Simon, we'll hire you for this. Show us whether you can do it or not and play into that.
yeah, it's an interesting thought.
I mean, there's a chaos gremlin part of me that really just wants kind of maybe get a sort of unsigned artist that's just a little bit different, and then maybe that would make the record labels actually sit up. It might get them sort of signed. It
But,
might get
but,
do well.
but,
It just might be
but somebody's got to pay for the promotional and the
yeah,
stage and the promo tour. Like, Remember Money has spent the last 3 months all over Europe performing, doing stuff like that. And the BBC can't and don't have the infrastructure to do a promotional tour for a music act. I mean, they're not a music
yeah,
label, so they found Remember Monday a music label and who took them on board and signed them and did this promo tour and they paid for it and then are launching this tour next year, which I hope does really well for them because they are lovely and they are great performers. And actually, they do have a great back catalogue of songs. And
yes.
that's kind of why,
That's a
which,
thing.
which
Yeah,
is a
they're other
shame
songs.
that their other songs are great. And it felt like they just tried to throw everything at this to write a Eurovision song rather than just saying, write a Remember Monday song.
Yeah, I think that is definitely the key point there. If they'd done something a little bit more authentically, then it might have landed slightly better with the televoters, I think.
Mm.
Let's talk about the format of the contest and whether it is potentially broken in a fundamental way, because I think the problem we have currently is that the semi-finals are televote only. Therefore, everyone who's not a Big Five member or a host country is gearing their entry to some extent towards televote friendliness so that they can get through. Then you get to the final, and the last 3 years, the jury has picked the winner. And the last 2 years, you've also faced this kind of juggernaut of televote from Israel, which you can't possibly hope to match. So there's this kind of disconnect in how you approach your vote, and it does feel like the changes that have been made to the show in the last few years have kind of tilted it in a way that makes it very, very hard to actually get your act to break through. So, is it broken? Can we fix it? What's the next step for Eurovision here?
So if I can go quickly, because I probably have to go for my train after
Sure.
this question. So let me answer it. Um, I think the one So it's really interesting because if you look at the breakdown of the jury results of the televote results for the semi-finals and compare it, some countries did much better in the semi-finals than they did on Saturday night with phone votes. And I think we have a very, very different audience all across Europe that watch semi-finals. The viewing figures are much lower all across Europe. I think they're people that are much more connected and involved with the contest, have different tastes to the viewer that turns it on a Saturday night. So actually, I think some of the ones that we thought would be good televote pleasers that didn't get through are quite telling that actually you don't necessarily need a good Eurovision song that the Eurovision community will work in the semi-finals with just televote only, and that could be a jury pleaser. There is, however, one change that the EBU has made, and that is the one that I think is far more impactful, and that is the opening the vote at the beginning of the show
Yes, I was going to say
or
that.
opening at the beginning of
Yeah,
the singing. That is the thing that if you can, and for the rest of the world vote, giving people 24 hours to do it. And that is where you get 20 votes each. If you want to campaign for a country, you're going to just go and do your 20 votes and you can do that straight away. And if you're a normal viewer of just liking songs, you might do 2 or 3 that you kind of pick as you kind of go along. But it also, I then think, skews it to earlier in the running order because you see things you like and you start voting. You might have run out of your 20 votes by the time you get to song 13, 14, 15.
Yeah, and also
And
yeah,
I think there's a point to be made here as well that if you're wanting to particularly campaign for a particular country and you've got
mm,
kind of the ability to have multiple people call up, then an hour or 2 hours of phone vote time gives you much more opportunity to do that, to call from multiple numbers. And as you say, if people who are voting on a more kind of I'm going to wait and see what I like kind of thing, they are going to spread their votes, as you say, around 2 or 3 different songs. So the people who are voting very concertedly for one act over 2 hours will always come out on top.
yeah. I mean, it's
yeah,
very much the phone bank of people with all the SIM cards versus like our living room as an example. Yeah, I think we cast about 3 or 4 votes each, and I think we did go for like 2 or 3 different acts. So that kind of bears out, I think.
And I think if anything does change, I can't imagine any change to the split on the juries,
Yeah,
but between 50-50. But if anything does change, and if a reference to the chat, I could imagine it would be that when the voting opens.
yeah,
I think they might return back to the challenge that the broadcast will be up against is for a lot of the broadcasters that are incredibly strapped for money. It's a fundraiser for them. It's €1.50 to vote in Finland. It's €1.10 to vote in Switzerland. It's a lot of money that comes into the broadcasters that Yle in Finland are really short of cash and need the money. So the opening it early brings in more money for them, but has the risk of opening up to campaigns and things like that. So yeah, that would be, if I had one call for what might change, that might change.
yeah. Thank you, Adrian, for
Thank
joining
you so
us.
much. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm running on fumes at the moment and very little sleep, but
We all
I'm
are.
about
We
to
all
go.
are.
I'm about to go on a nice train journey to Paris and then to London.
Ooh.
So I'll have
Lovely.
a nice TGV to sit on and sleep for a little bit and unwind and maybe just listen to Germany a bit.
Oh,
So that's the one that's going to stick with me. So thank you very much for having me
oh
on.
no, thank you for
Goodbye.
coming. Cheers, Adrian. Love to have you on the show. AJ, while we're here at the end, let's just have a little quick chat about the future of the contest. Obviously, I think, as much as I don't want this entire episode to be about the Israel question, but arguably the Israel question isn't going to go away, and it is
Yeah.
kind of hard to see what the next move is here because there's still calls obviously for them to be banned, but the EBU are in the position now where they won the televote last night, so absence of discovering any evidence of wrongdoing in that televote, they're going to turn around and say, well, this is the country people want to vote for. So, this has put the EBU in an incredibly difficult position, arguably of their own making.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they've obviously, not really been listening to anything people have been saying, but yeah, I mean, as you say, it was an astounding amount of votes, and I don't think there's going to be any investigation into any kind of funny business with the voting. I mean, arguably, say probably should, but given that we've had, as I understand it, there's now 3 different broadcasters that are going to be slapped with fines at the least, because Spain did put up a message beforehand, before the broadcast, about Palestine. And I believe that, yeah, and then Finland's commentator obviously was talking about lots of the current affairs, casualties and things like that. But I don't know if you heard that the Belgian broadcaster literally cut the broadcast and didn't show Israel's song.
I did hear this, yes. I think we were trying to verify this earlier, whether that was true or not, but it does seem to be what's being said.
Yeah, so I had a colleague in the press room that was saying this. So I'm thinking, I think, especially with Spain, because they're one of the big 5, and very much financially important to the whole contest, I do think that conversations need to be had, at least with the big 5. Because if one of them is kind of going, well, this sucks, and they're not really caring, they're getting slapped on the wrist with any fines, but if they walked away because of what's happening, it would just be a disaster for the EBU. There's like good luck budgeting for Austria.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. I mean, there's 2 other points to consider in that, which is one that the EBU again find themselves in a bind with the big 5 because Germany have said the opposite. That they have said that if Israel pull out, then if Israel abandon, then we pull out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And there's also the matter that the new chair of the ESC reference group is from the Spanish delegation. So the incoming
I
chair.
forgot about that.
So there's that sort of factor in. If Spain have had this experience of this contest, feeling that it has been unfair, that they have been penalised for what they, presumably considered to have been, their ethical duty in the framing of this performance, then, how is that going to play out in the post-show conversations? I mean, I think, I kind of said last year that last year was kind of a PR disaster for Eurovision, that they couldn't afford to have 2 in a row. And I feel they have sidestepped it in the sense that the event itself went off relatively smoothly and there haven't been kind of any big backstage dramas. But I think there is a lot of discontent amongst the fans about the outcome and the voting, and there's no reason, I think, to assume that things are going to improve anytime soon. That there's every sense to think that we'll be sat here with exactly the same thing happening next year. So
Well, yeah.
the contest is
I
in a
mean,
very difficult position.
I don't. I mean, my thoughts are very much thinking about how long Martin Osterdahl has left in his sort of. I mean, obviously we've been laughing about the whole. He's been in his little soundproof booth. He's not been allowed to say anything or get booed or whatever. But it genuinely looked like our living room was kind of saying the light has left his eyes.
Yeah.
His he's got to look at himself in the mirror and go, what a absolute mess.
It's what's really interesting actually is in literally the space of the year we've gone from there is a song in the final all about how much we love Martin Osterdahl to Martin Osterdahl is in a box, he's not allowed to talk, and someone else gets to say his catchphrase. Like that
Yeah,
that is
exactly.
quite the turnaround in the space of 12 months.
It really is, yeah. I mean, it's kind of gone from great, new blood, Jon Ola's off to, and yeah, it's absolutely astounding the downfall.
Yeah.
But just say it's sort of a crisis of their own making, really.
That's very much how it feels, and one can argue that the EBU dodged a bullet last night in the outcome. The funny thing is, it feels like it was a narrow escape. It wasn't actually that narrow. There was quite a decent gap. I think it was about 79 points between position 1 and position 2 on the leaderboard, so it wasn't that close. But the way it was framed and the way it played out, it felt like it, and I think has left a lot of people watching thinking. A Eurovision Song Contest won by Israel is probably a question of when and not if. And that's difficult. And I think, then they put themselves in the position of, the next year gets hosted in Israel. Will there be boycotts? I think there's certainly I don't know if I believe the talk that some people are saying that, there would be a widespread boycott. I think there would perhaps be a small scale boycott, potentially Spain, Finland, Iceland, Ireland, some of those kind of countries who've already kind of voiced concerns, likely would be threatening to boycott, if not actually doing so, and potentially also whether finding an artist would be more challenging, because although I'm sure every country would find an artist, I think they would certainly have a lot of people who might normally enter Eurovision who might look at Eurovision Song Contest held in Israel and go, do you know what, not this year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think they really would struggle to find. As you say, I think it is only a matter of time, and I think, like we were saying the other night, I think it's just the way that the points are being allocated, and the kind of we're always very worried that the win would be snuck through because maybe the fave doesn't get enough votes, or the maths just makes it so, because the maths was very terrifying.
The maths was very terrifying. I found myself, just constantly watching every single jury result like a hawk and doing calculations in my head. And that's the second year in a row I've just found the results sequence incredibly stressful in a way that I'm saying, do I even want to put myself through that next year?
Well, exactly. I think the last time I was thinking like a genuinely exciting, I think, Liverpool 2023, where we were all in a mate's hotel room, just yelling at the screen. And I don't think I've felt that since, which is kind of sad. But it as you say, it's more, we said earlier, it's more relief in a way. I think when that final split screen happened, and we were just sitting going, oh. And then when the result came through for JJ, we were going, phew.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Rather than yay, which I really feel for him, because lovely guy, beautiful voice.
Yeah.
And in fact, the first, an artist of colour, he's half Filipino, I believe. Really great to see him win, but I just feel so sorry that it seems to have been overshadowed.
Yes,
by,
very much so.
And I do hope, I don't know if they've actually had any sort of press conference stuff afterwards either, which I think is a little rum. But I hope that he's, gets to have a nice chat with the press and go,
I also really, really hope he got to go to the loo at some point, because I remember when Michelle went to talk to him and he really needed a wee, and then he had to go and sing again. Like, poor guy.
It seems to be. Did you hear the official podcast interviewed him like after a semi, and he said that he was sitting with the results sequence, and he could have said to one of his delegation, "I really need to go to the toilet," and they said, "No, you can't move now because the cameras are always going to be cutting to you with all the votes." He was like, so it seems like he's just always needing a stress read. Very relatable.
Yeah, very relatable. And this is exactly why I have not entered the Eurovision Song Contest, because I simply need too many toilet breaks. That's the
just like I need
It's
to
the
wait.
only reason I haven't done it. Well, let's try and end on an upbeat note after a slightly slightly depressing
Chaotic.
conversation this year. But I think we can at least look back at this year's competition and say we've got some great songs out of it. We've had it's been lovely watching some of the friendships involved. I'm living for the little foursome of Sisal, Miriana, JJ, and Erica just hanging out together on
They're
Instagram all the time.
adorable.
That's so lovely. I always
Yeah.
enjoy the little Eurovision friendships that form, and that's one of the things that has kept me sane this week is just thinking what a lovely time they've all had, and one of them
It
getting to
is,
win.
and it's always nice to sort of scroll the socials, and rather than sort of doom scrolling, it's I think there was Jamala was sitting in a park with like singing the Ukrainian song, or the random duets happen, or just people kind of and that's just really wholesome. And as you say, we've just discovered so many excellent artists, and I think part of it is like you don't necessarily need to be going to the Eurovision events to kind of, if you've discovered them, buy their merch, go to their gigs. In fact, I've got tickets for Baby Lasagna in August because he's bizarrely coming to the Edinburgh Fringe.
Oh, amazing!
So I'm flexing my press energy and going to cover that.
See, this is the thing that I don't, that I would not want to lose from Eurovision is the acts that I see every year who make me think I want to go and see them live. Like if Erica Vickman's coming to London, I'm there. If Vibe are coming to London, I am so there.
Oh yeah.
And
I do. I mean, I do recommend, like, just if there's someone you like, absolutely go to their gig. Like, give them the support because I've seen Sam Ryder, I've seen Daddy, and I actually managed to be lucky enough to see Kärja and Erica Vickman at it was like quite a small Finnish music festival that was up in like the Arctic Circle.
Oh wow.
And absolutely, like, the best random holiday decision I ever made, because it was just, didn't understand a word everyone was saying, but the best performances in amongst all these kids just going cha-cha-cha and singing Cicciolino. Just brilliant. You absolutely go and support your faves.
Yeah, exactly. That's the kind of the united by music that we kind of need to be taking from all of this. Is that there's these artists will hopefully be able to kind of travel and play to audiences who, even if they didn't have the outcome they wanted at Eurovision, they'll have this huge new fan base in other countries now that will buy tickets to go and see them and will give them the welcome that they deserve. And that's what this should be about, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. They need to know that they are loved and supported.
Exactly. I think
we do love
that would be a lovely note to end this on. Fantastic. Well, AJ, thank you so much for being with us all week. We really, really appreciate it because you've given up quite a lot of your time for the sake of our podcast, and it's been lovely having you on with everything you've had to bring and contribute with all of your Icelandic Finnish and Arctic Circle music festival knowledge.
You're very welcome. Yeah, no, it's been a delight.
And thank you to everyone who has been listening and sticking with us this week. I will be back for one more podcast next Monday. That will be me doing some final reflections on this year's contest and then going on hiatus to recover and reflect. So I will be back. Please do tune in next Monday to listen to my final thoughts. Please do, as always, like and subscribe and leave us lovely reviews if you can. That's always really, really nice to see. And just genuinely to everyone who's been listening this year, it really is very much appreciated. Thank you so much. We don't take any of it for granted. It's truly wonderful. And until next time, good night Europe and good morning Australia.